I was listening to an episode of Lex Friedman's podcast, and that's an awesome podcast, by the way, if you guys haven't checked it out. He's a MIT professor, but he's like a young guy. And his podcast, he interviews a lot of like intellectual people, a lot of professors, authors, people that work in science and mathematics. It's a really cool podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, I would recommend it. Anyway, I was listening to an episode that he had, and he had on a gentleman named Eric Brynjolfsson. Or, sorry, Brynjolfsson. Yep, Eric Brynjolfsson. And to give you some background, Eric Brynjolfsson is a professor at Stanford, and he runs their digital economy lab. And according to Stanford's website, the lab is, quote, an integral component of the Stanford Institute for Human Centered AI, serving as its primary hub for conducting research related to the economic implication of technology. Now, Dr. Brynjolfsson's research focuses on the implications of the economic implications of digital technologies and AI. So basically, this guy is entirely focused on the results that AI and digital technologies will bring for the economy. So that is sort of his focus. He's focused on economics, but as they relate to digital technology and AI more specifically. And before he was at Stanford, he was actually at MIT for 25 years. So I think we can just start this episode off by safely assuming that the things that he is talking about are areas where he is very, very comfortable, very well read. He is the expert. This is a smart guy. We're talking about Stanford and MIT economics professor, and he's able to meld that economics knowledge with the knowledge of new technologies and AI. That is a smart guy. Like I'm like, like the filling out your taxes can sometimes be complicated, let alone figuring out all the economic implications of artificial intelligence, right? So I just kind of want to use that as some framing as we go along here. That the guest on this particular episode of Lex's podcast is very well established in the economics community. So Lex asked him a very simple question, and I thought it was a really thought provoking question, but it was basically that if we assume there are fundamental problems in taxation or some fundamental problems in the economy overall, what would you try to fix? And what would you speak to? And I think that Dr. Brynjolfsson had some really, really interesting insights, and one in particular that I want to talk about. But I'll go ahead and give you the summary of sort of everything he said to answer that question of if there's a problem with taxes or the economy, where would you start, basically? And what he said was that we don't really need to totally reinvent stuff. Basically, look at it like economics 101. We had some very simple tactics that we used in the 20th century, and then we moved away from those. Sorry, I needed a drink there. Anyway, so we had these principles in the 20th century, and they're super simple. When you're here, I'm gonna be like, those are very simple, but these are ones that we had, and then we've moved away from since. And so the first is we used to invest in education far more, and we also used to invest in infrastructure far more than we do now. I think the United States at this point, I think our overall infrastructure has been rated by like the world organizations that do that type of rating at like a D plus. It's our airports, our public transportation. It's awful, and I think everyone knows it. But the reality is that we used to invest in that more as well. We also used to welcome immigrants a lot more. Immigrants that wanted to come and work. We it was a lot easier for them to participate in the economy in the 20th century compared to the 21st century. We also had a more fair tax system. So the taxes on high income people have actually come down since the 20th century, was one of the things that he noted in this interview. And those are all sort of examples of things that he feels like we've moved away from that would be easy fixes to any issues like were posed in the question originally, any issues revolving around taxation or um, fundamental problems with our economy. And he then went on to mention a very specific solution that he thinks could be a possibility. And that solution is Pigouvian taxes.